with the deadlift pattern specifically, the target area is gonna be your posterior chain, so the back side of your body, specifically your hamstrings and your glutes. Your back stabilizers are involved, so think right along your spine and then across your QLs there will be involved, but they are not the primary movers. So I want the movement to be coming from your glutes and your hamstrings, and your back is there obviously supporting the movement, and it will be used, but it should not be the area that you feel the most. So when you are doing a hinge pattern, you want to keep your spine nice and neutral. You're hinging at your hips, so you're thinking about pushing your hips back, and I'm keeping my back nice and straight. I'm not rounding my back. I'm also not arching my butt back and ribs flaring. So a nice neutral position. So I think about having my ribs stacked over my hips. That also kind of just naturally cues on my core. But another thought to engage your core would be if I was to punch you in the stomach, that kind of like braced position is what I want you to feel. So ribs stacked over the hips, pushing my hips back as I hinge down, keeping my back nice and straight, feeling a stretch in the back of my legs here, so my hamstrings. And then I'm thinking about squeezing my butt as I stand up and then hitting full hip extension, which means just where my hips, so when I squeeze my butt, that's where I extend to, not through back extension where I'm coming farther back through. So pushing the hips back and then standing up to neutral, not extending further, which is a very common thing I see with deadlifts. I find guys are particularly bad at this. Anyway, so just a full hip extension and then lowering back down. How much you bend your knees is going to depend on a couple things. One, what is the variation? So a conventional deadlift versus a Romanian deadlift would have you bending your knees a bit more conventionally. So a conventional deadlift still is a hinge pattern. You're extending up, but you're bending your knees a bit more versus a Romanian or a stiff-legged deadlift. We're just gonna have just a soft bend in the knees to unlock them, but otherwise fairly straight. So you're gonna feel a lot more hamstrings with a Romanian or a stiff-legged variation versus conventional. So you will also not be able to lift typically as heavy as you could with a conventional deadlift. Okay, so let's practice it with dumbbells, and then I'm also gonna show you a variation with a kettlebell, and then a couple options for range of motion to modify this based off of your mobility in your hamstrings, and then just your current strength, or if you are someone that typically feels your low back in this pattern or lots of movements. So let's start with dumbbells. If you have one dumbbell, you have some options. You could hold the head of it. How you hold it is up to you, but I typically like to create two peace sign scissors and put my fingers underneath and then hold it just like so. So your feet are gonna be about hip width apart, so you have space for the dumbbell to come through. And then what we just talked about, pushing my hips back. Actually, let's start from the top. Ribs stack, push the hips back, spine stays neutral, soft bend in the knees, push back, touch the floor, and then push through your feet to come up, squeeze your butt, and then lower back down, keeping your toes and your heels on the ground, pushing up, pushing my hips back, feeling that stretch in the back of my legs, spine stays straight, and then pulling up to stand. So that's with one dumbbell, which would be actually the same as a kettlebell. So I'll show you that as well. So with the kettlebell, I'll show you from the front view. You're gonna hold the handles. If you have rings, you might need to take them off. You're gonna hold the handle and stand it up. And then same thing, my feet have enough space for the kettlebell to come between. Soft bend in the knees, push my hips back, lower down to the floor, back is still straight, and then pulling up. Lower down, push the hips back, feeling a stretch in the back of my legs. And then I'm gonna push through the floor, push through my feet, squeeze my butt, and then lower back down. So those are if you have one dumbbell or one kettlebell. If you have two dumbbells, then you're gonna have a bit more of a narrow stance of your feet so they can be, quite a bit closer together. Hands are gonna be right at your side, soft bend in the knees, push the hips back is staying straight. If you can, touch the floor and stand it back up. I'll show you from the side, soft bend the knees, ribs back over my hips, push my hips back, lower down, and then exhale to stand up. Lower down, inhale, exhale to stand up. If coming all the way down, you end up losing form, so your back starts to round because your hamstrings might be too tight, or even like upper back mobility isn't quite there, then I don't want you to go all the way to the ground. So you could just go soft bend in the knees, back over the hips, and then lower down to maybe the knees. If that's where you have good form still before you start to round your back, then just go to there and stand it back up, lower down and back up. You're still loading your hamstrings and squeezing your butt to stand, so you're still hitting the same area, but you're not compromising your back by rounding it forwards just to get more range. The other option would be to elevate your target. So if you had 2 dumbbells, then you could have 2 stacks of a weight, like of maybe 2 steps or something that you could aim for. Or if you're doing it with 1 weight, it will go around it, see how it's elevated. So my end range is about 3 inches high. And then same pattern still applies, ribs stacked over the hips, push the hips back, feet are on the floor, push through your feet, squeeze your butt and lower back down, keeping my back nice and straight. I will say the one downside to a kettlebell or 1 dumbbell is that we often round forwards to hold that position. So be mindful of that, avoid the rounding position as best you can. If you find like if you're a bit more chesty, it might be hard to kind of like be in that position, get a good breath, everything else. So I would say try out 2 dumbbells. And if you have bands, lastly, I'll show you that option as well. So ideally a long band, pretty hard to do with a mini band. You're gonna stand on the band. Hands are gonna go through the loop on both sides. And then from here, same pattern, ribs stacked over my hips, extending up, squeezing my butt, and lower down. Your feet are relatively close here, just like you would with 2 dumbbells. If that feels pretty easy, you can make it harder by pulling up in the middle of your feet to have more tension, and then pulling up and lowering down. With a band, you're getting accommodated resistance, so the tension at the bottom is less and more at the top, which is fine. It's just different than with dumbbells. But same pattern principles apply whether you're using dumbbells, bands, or kettlebells, or a barbell.